Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for coming. The fellowship known as Alcoholics Anonymous has, among other things, a whole lot of slogans, we call them, little kernels of truth that its members can hang on to for the rest of their lives, especially in times of danger. They're little lifesavers that you just cling to. Let go and let God. Think. Live and let live. Easy does it. There but for the grace of God. One day at a time. In fact, easy does it and one day at a time are slogans that you see along any highway in the country on bumpers. Bumper stickers have those words on them. And whenever you see that, you can pretty well bet that the driver or someone in the car belongs to this great fellowship. They're wonderful things, but I think that a lot of them have been perhaps misunderstood or misinterpreted. I think every one of them needs a little bit of understanding and perhaps even at times explanation, especially something like let go and let God. But what I would like to do this evening is just make a few comments about the two you see written here. Easy does it, one day at a time. They kind of dovetail and go together. Now, I would just like to pass along a little story I picked up a couple of years ago. A member of the Fellowship of AA went up to a sponsor one time, and he was feeling very, very bad. He said, I'm in a peck of trouble. He said, I have no job. It's all going out. Nothing's coming in. And I was just informed that if I don't have $5,000 by the first of next month, the bank takes my home. Well, then his sponsor said to him the easiest words that anyone ever said to another. Don't worry. You live just one day at a time. 2 weeks later he came up. He said, really, I can't eat or sleep. He said, it's bad now. One more week, my home is gone. He said, I still don't work. It's all going out, nothing coming in. He said, they're going to take my home. Don't worry. You live one day at a time. Well, the first came. Well, I said, they just took my home. I didn't have the $5,000. His sponsor said, now worry. This is the day. Alcoholics have one tremendous characteristic that usually is common to all. Lots of pep and no judgment. Set off in any direction, doing anything, and usually trip and fall on the way to nowhere. You've all heard me tell the story of the airplane going from America to Italy, and in the middle of the flight, the pilot said, now I have two announcements to make. One's good news and one's bad. The first is, we're lost. The second is great. We're making damn good time. Well, that's almost characteristic of a lot of alcoholics. They haven't the foggiest notion of where they're going, but they're getting there quick. Now let's switch to the sober life to which these things apply. If there are any alcoholics listening to my voice, see if these thoughts or these questions have ever occurred to you. Because usually when a person gets sober, he wants this sobriety now. You look at someone with 20 years sobriety, I wonder if I'll ever get that. You look at someone who obviously is enjoying peace of mind, this thing that we call serenity. Will I ever get that? And then these questions. I know that I want it, but will I stay sober? Will I ever clear up my debts? Will my family ever love me again? Will I or can I ever regain my own self-respect? Will I ever stop causing pain? All of these good things are now seeable. He knows they're attainable, and he wants them. God, he wants them so bad. And he wants them yesterday. And AA always says to the impatient alcoholic, easy does it. AA says to her sons and daughters every day, easy does it. You have to live life as it comes, one day at a time. And you say, how can I do all these things? How can I regain self-respect? How can I pay off all my debts? Easy does it. You will do anything one day at a time. And then the slogans that we've heard for a lifetime, slogans I'm sure you've said to your children when they're impatient about things. Rome really wasn't built in a day. And the longest journey begins with the very first step. The biggest building begins with the first brick. I mean, these are truisms. We all know these things up here, but trying to grasp them down here. What has happened to most alcoholics through their lives is failure at so many things because they have set out with a whole lot of motivation but haven't done the dirty work to get there. I remember one time in the seminary, one of our profs, he just died very recently. He was trying to explain to us the difference between what is called an efficacious desire and one that isn't. An effective desire and one that isn't. He said, let me give you an example of an ineffective desire. He said, all my life I've wanted to be able to speak Spanish. I've never sat down day to day and studied. And so he still wants to speak Spanish and can't. An effective desire means I want this goal or this end, and I am willing to take the means to get there. What happens when we don't prepare before setting out for some goal? The answer is in every house. I wonder how many of our attics, garages, and basements are filled with hobbies that have never been fulfilled. I wonder how many sets of golf clubs have been the home for 16 generations of spiders. Wonder how many tubes of very expensive oils have become petrified and would knock the artist out if he got hit with them. You know one characteristic of the alcoholic? He wants to be a golfer, but he wants to be Jack Nicklaus in 3 weeks. He wants to be a painter, and after 1 or 2 ineffectual attempts, he drops it. But the instruments that he buys have to be the best. My paintbrushes came from bristles, from anteaters, from Madagascar, $1,000 a piece. The alcoholic does things like that. He spends tons of money on things that he never works at. Now, what happens when we do things or try to do things without proper preparation? Failure. Failure. When you're not Jack Nicklaus within 3 weeks, you give it up because it takes work and it takes a stick-to-itiveness to get anything done. Failure always results in frustration. Alcoholics know that from their drinking days. Frustration always results in discouragement. Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing on God's earth more effective in destroying human maturing spiritual progress than discouragement. You get discouraged enough and you just quit. I must take life as it comes, as everything else in nature must. A blade of grass will grow a day's growth in a day's time. And you and I will progress in life, in the maturing process, a day's growth in a day's time. I wonder how many people, having had the door to God opened up through their sobriety, they just want to gulp this spiritual life in and figure that if I go on an AA retreat this weekend, I can be canonized by next Wednesday morning. Doesn't happen that way. We grow a day's growth in a day's time, and AA always tells us, look, easy does it, easy does it, easy does it, easy does it. We live a day at a time. What is a day? Now, you've heard these over and over. Hey, I'll see you a day at a time. Stay sober a day at a time. Day at a time, day at a time. It's everywhere. What is it, and how do we do it? I remember once hearing a clergyman give an invocation at a banquet, and it was a beautiful thing. And right in the middle of it, he gave his definition of a day. And he called a day a manageable segment of time. Now, I'll qualify that. I think it's partially manageable. I have no control over my age. I have no control over today's date. I have no control over the weather, but we all understand what he means. It is a partially manageable segment of time. It's the one thing God puts in my hand to use, and it is usable. And I am asked to live life one day at a time. A day, as you know, is the basic division of time, 24 hours, night and day, work and rest, light and darkness. It's divided into hours, minutes, seconds, and so forth. It's multiplied into weeks, months, years, decades, and so on. But basically, it is the basic division of time. And that's what we have to work in. Now, the time of my life is divided into past, present, and future. And you hear a lot of nonsense, really, about how we should look at these three segments of our lives, our past, our present, our future. Even in treatment, have you ever heard a counselor say, well, the past, it's gone, dump it? My past, just like yours, is locked in. I don't dump it anywhere. The only thing I can do is resolve the guilt of the past. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous has steps 4 and 5 in order to resolve the guilt of one's past. But my past is there. Do you see the me that you're looking at right now? I am the result of every single past today of my life. So are you. Now, we are told to forget the past. It's gone. Not at all. My past is important. The only thing really I can do with it is commend it to the mercy of God. I commend my past to the mercy of God. If you are like me, there's a lot of my past I'm very ashamed of. There's a whole lot of my past I'm very proud of. But there is one infallible fact about my past. I cannot change one iota of it. It is there. I commend my past to the mercy of God. You hear a lot of talk about the future that is kind of nonsensical. Have you ever heard this? Well, really, there is no future because when tomorrow comes, it's today. Oh. I mean, you know, that's verbal gymnastics. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a future, so do you. The only thing that is true of my future is I don't know how long it is. And you know, there's a tremendous difference between making rational preparation for the future and projecting. Those in AA, have you ever heard that word before? You're projecting, you're projecting. You know, some poor guy says, I think I'll go to the ball game tomorrow night. You're projecting, you're projecting. Yeah, whenever you hear that enough, just tell them to bug off. I'll tell you what projecting is. Here's a fellow shows up at his first meeting. He's got holes in his shoes, clothesline for a belt, a T-shirt he's been wearing for 67 years. That's it. And he looks very worried. And when the meeting's over, they say, what's wrong? He said, I'm concerned about who's going to come up with $1 million. You say, what $1 million? Well, I know sobriety is here, and I'm going to get sober. I'm a very brilliant entrepreneur type. And I will get into some business and become a multimillionaire, but I still have a few shady practices, and I might get to embezzling investors' funds, and when I get caught, obviously they're going to put me in jail. The bail will be $1 million. I'm wondering who's going to come up with it. That is projecting. However, most of you, I'm absolutely certain, are parents with children. And if you are not providing for their future, providing for your family in case of whatever, I think you're crazy. There is a certain rational attitude we should have about the future. The point is, I have precious little control over it, and so just as I commended my past to the mercy of God, I commend my future to His divine providence, that He will watch over it. My present, I consecrate to His love. My past to His mercy, my future to His providence, my present to His love. Do you know how, if you're in AA yourself, you know how important your past is? AA commands you to recall it every time you tell your story. Doesn't your big book say our story should disclose in a general way what we used to be like? My past is dreadfully important if I can learn enough from it to make intelligent judgments about my activities of today, about providing for the future. For example, if you're an alcoholic, your past should tell you that and nail that in constantly. Your present behavior should say, stay away from slippery places. My past is important. My future is important. The only thing that AA and sensible people try to tell us about the three phases of our lives is this. My past is important, my future is important, but I should not live in the past nor live in the future. You've seen it in people who are brand new to recovery. They live with the phenomenon of guilt and remorse and shame, and it almost kills them until we can get them on an even keel. Others are so worried about what will happen in the next few weeks or months, the present almost goes by the board. I look at my past intelligently and my future intelligently, but this is the day that I have to act in. This is manageable because this is a day in which I make decisions that are perhaps based on my past and will have an effect on my future. Today is the most important day of my life. Every one of us looks at others and we kind of envy them, and yet every one of us builds his own monument to himself. Every single one of us. Every human life is a mosaic composed of the thousands of tiles of the todays of one's life. Now, most of us, I think, are pretty ordinary people. If it is based on color, from light to dark, I imagine most of us live a fairly good life. We have some lovely colors, we have some dark colors, we have some light ones. Maybe even there's a gold and a diamond or two. But each of us builds his own monument. You will not make me small nor make me great. I will. And I won't make you small or make you great. You will. Now, how do we live today in this sober life of cleaning up all the things that we worry about when we come in? How about financial debts? Let me share with you the experience of a friend of mine who happens to be a recovering alcoholic. He was sober several months, and he was quite serious about it. It was his second time around, and he was serious about it. And he sat down with his wife. He had a job and a good one. He owed a lot of people. He lived in a flea bag. In fact, when the fellows would drive him home from a meeting, he made them let him off at the corner so they couldn't see where he lived. One of the great accomplishments of his life was when he was sober enough to be able to buy 6 coffee cups to invite people in and all drink out of the same kind of a cup. After he got his license to drive back, the first automobile he owned was a $45 ex-taxi cab. But he was serious about his sobriety, and he was serious about making things right. He owed money to a couple of doctors, a dentist, and God knows how many landlords and landladies, and he owed members of his family. He sat down with his wife and went over their budget. As we can live in better circumstances, this much money is set aside for that, this much is for this, and this much for that. They had so much extra with which to make good what they owed. And that young man went to every single person he owed money to, and this is exactly how he went about it. He said, "Doctor, I owe you $1,200. I don't have $1,200. But I have a job, I am sober, and I intend to pay you back every penny if you will allow me to pay you 50 cents a week." The man was elated. How many of us owed money by someone else? How many of us would react exactly the same way the doctor did? He was just pleased that this man was well and happy and willing to do something. Today, it's 20 years later. He is about 44, 45 years old. He has been through 10 new automobiles, was able to buy, and subsequently, when his children married, sell a home, and he lives in a lovely condo now, has changed jobs and so on and so forth. We all know the success stories of those who get sober, stay sober, and work at it. Babe Dietrichson Zacharias, case 2. She was perhaps the most famous woman athlete of the century. Her records have been broken, but she was the pioneer. When her track days were over, she became a professional golfer. And one day at a golf course, she drove her ball off of a tee, and a man standing nearby, he just shook his head. He said, "Great Scott, babe." He said, "That was a picture of grace." He said, "You must have been born with that swing." She stooped over to pick up her tee, and she looked at him and said, "Born with it, hell, that swing came from hitting 1,000 golf balls every day." And as most of you know, I live with Tommy and May Abraham. They have one son, Alex, who today is a professional bowler. That young fellow started to bowl, I think, when he was 14. And for most of his life, he has bowled to such a degree that his fingers look like something from a creature from a tree. I've seen him bowl when almost the bone was showing through his flesh. 100 games a week. 100 games a week. He kept at it. Today, he's good. He's good, but he earned it. What does that have to do with us? Prepare and then execute. Prepare and then execute. Your entire AA program is a perfect, classic, textbook case of living by preparing before you execute. You admit you're sick, you take the steps to get well. You enter a room and look at well people, you come to believe you can get well. You make a decision to turn your life to God, you spend the rest of your life doing it. You take an inventory, you make known what's wrong. You become willing to have defects removed, you ask. You make a list and become willing to make amends, and you do it. The whole thing is a classic pattern of preparing before you execute. Now, even some drinkers do that. Very few, but some do. There was an Irish guy about 2 weeks before Christmas. He called a local liquor store. He said, "I want a case of bourbon, case of scotch, case of vodka, case of gin, and 4 cases of beer." The fellow said, "You must be getting ready for a wing-ding of a Christmas party." "No," he said, "I'm trying to get up nerve enough to go to confession." You prepare before you execute. There's another beautiful story. I've told it elsewhere, but it's marvelous. Prepare before you execute. The animals of Africa were having a football game. The rhinos team playing the zebras team. Rhino kicked off. The zebra caught it, got to the 10, 3 offensive plays. He couldn't get anywhere. He had a punt. He put the ball in the end zone. The old rhino could hardly see. He grabbed it, went up the field. Of course, there was no broken field running. He just aimed at the opposite goal, knocked everybody down, and scored. At halftime, it was something like 56-0 in favor of the rhino. So they come out for the second half, and the zebra kicked off again. Rhino grabbed it. He got to the 3, and he went down as if he'd been shot. In fact, he staggered when he got up. And everybody on the zebra's team said, "Who tackled the rhino? Who hit him?" Baboon didn't, the lion didn't, the alligator didn't. And this little voice from the ground kept persisting, "I did, I did." And they looked around. Finally, they saw it. It was a little helmet about that big around. And when they lifted the helmet, under it was a 1-inch centipede. "You hit the rhino?" He says, "Yeah, no sweat." They said, "Where were you during the first half?" He said, "Putting my shoes on." You prepare before you execute. All right. How does the newly recovered alcoholic prepare his life before he executes it, one day at a time? I had a priest, he's a friend of mine as well as a teacher. He addressed that problem one day, talking to us seminarians. He said, "Here's the way you handle a day. Number one, here's the way you prepare for it. Just have a little pad at your desk and write down no more than 3, preferably no more than 2, things Now listen to the next part. It really is important. A couple of things that can be done. For example, today's Wednesday, I'll write a letter home. Or today's Thursday, we have a free afternoon, I'll put in an hour in the library working on my thesis. Whatever it is, write something down that can be done today. Now, my friends, this is the clue to the whole thing. How you live one day at a time. You have your preparation list. Tiny things. They don't have to be earth-shattering. I will call so-and-so today. Write it down. Now, this is the clue to life. Then, you do it. Then you do it. What happens at the end of the day? You take that tiny little list, I'll write a letter home, and I'll make this and that phone call, and you check off the fact you have done it. You know what that means? You set out to do something, you did it. That's called success. And my friends, there is nothing on God's earth that succeeds like success. But most of us have dreams of grandeur. I'm going to do this great thing. I am not going to be a martyr. I hope not. I mean that. There's only one thing wrong with pain. It hurts. Greatness in the spiritual life means living each day consecrated to the love of God. There's nothing romantic about it. There's nothing unusual about it. There's nothing earth-shattering about it. And there's not a whole lot that's earth-shattering about writing a letter or making a phone call or saying hello to somebody. But if I keep setting tiny goals and succeeding, then my life will be a success. For the alcoholic, the recovered alcoholic, first things come first, don't they? Today may be one of the 3 or 4 days that I go to a meeting. Write that down. I'll go to a meeting tonight. These are the first things first. These never vary. I will read from my 24-hour-a-day book. I will read so much AA literature. I'll call my sponsor. Whatever it is, whatever your first things first are, they're done every day. Then you make a tiny, tiny little list of things to do, and then you do them, and then you do them. My friends, the most important day of your life wasn't the day you were born, wasn't the day you went to school or graduated from school, wasn't the day you married or even gave birth to a child, and it wasn't yesterday. It's this one. This day. It is this day. How many of you have ever worked with drinking alcoholics? And the only thing you hold out to them is, nobody's asking you to stay sober for a lifetime. Can you stay sober for one day of your life until we can get you to a meeting? Don't you do that? I know that AA teaches that from day one. I think Lincoln once said, I can take anything for a day. I remember once asking God, he was magnificent, handsome, tall, slim Navy pilot, 4-striper, looked like a teenager except for his gray hair. Statement one night, I was giving a talk at the Naval Academy, and I was speaking with him and another fellow afterwards, and the other guy said, well, you know, Bob and I didn't drink for 6 years. I said, how come? He said, we happened to be POWs at the time. And I looked at him. I said, 6 years? He said, 6. I said, my God, Captain, I know that I couldn't have taken that for 6 hours. You know what he said to me? He said, Father, you weren't there. You weren't there. You don't know what you can take and what you can't. If I had been told that I would undergo those tortures for 6 years, I would probably have willed to die. But he said, we just lived from day to day. Perfect AA. Only he had no drinking problem. This day is the most important day of your life. How do you stay sober? You don't take a drink and you do the other things that are essential. And when tomorrow comes, you do the same thing. There's an old friend of mine. I have heard him speak many times, and he always says this. You know, when I first came to the program, he said, they told me that if I went to meetings, said my prayers, and didn't take a drink, I could stay sober. He said, that's worked for me for 25 years. I think I'll try it again tomorrow. There's nothing romantic about living life. We simply do what we're supposed to do each day as it comes. And then as I build up good todays, I don't worry so much about my yesterdays. And I have pretty good confidence about tomorrows. For those of you who are in the AA program, I know that many of you have a little book called 24 Hours a Day. I don't know whether any of you have ever noticed right in the beginning this magnificent, beautiful, lovely Sanskrit proverb right in the beginning. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of existence, the bliss of growth, the splendor of action, the glory of power. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. I want to thank you for coming here this afternoon. And I want to thank you for listening to me. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for helping to make this day, this one, the 21st, the greatest day of my life. I'll see you again, one day at a time.